Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, Executive Producer and host of Riprap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Bill Ayers. We'll talk about his book, Public Enemy, Confessions of an American Dissident. Welcome to Riprap.
Thanks, Jim, very much for having me.
This is an enjoyable book. I really like reading it. But as I told you, I'd like to talk about the end first, because there's that scene in the Grant Park that's just marvelous, and I think that also is a way of introducing the different struggles that you've had along the way. So,
Want me to tell you about that scene?
Yeah, really.
Read anything?
No, just talk.
Well, you know, we were caught up in the 2008 campaign. I was made into a kind of a caricature to try to bring down candidate Senator Obama. And of course it backfired, it didn't work, so Obama was elected. And the afterward ends in Grant Park in 2008, in November, I think it was November 4th, when Obama is elected president. And we had gone to my brother's house. My brother was a Democratic Party activist and had campaigned in several states, and his friends were there and they were all ecstatic. And then we went over to our closer comrades' house, Barbara Ransby and Peter Sporn, who are part of, you know, our anti-war, anti-imperialist kind of collective in Chicago. And there the tone was decidedly more sober and subdued, but nonetheless, the excitement was palpable. Bernie and I couldn't resist. I mean, the way I think I said it there is, there was nobody inclined to dance in the streets, but Bernie and I felt like we wanted to dance in the streets because we'd endured this long 8 years of Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld. That was a lot. And then we'd endured this 4-month political campaign in which we'd gotten kind of caught in the middle of it inadvertently. And we wanted to go downtown when it was clear that it was over and celebrate. And when we got there, it was an extraordinary scene. It felt like there were 1 million people pouring in from all sides. And I got just caught up in it. I had no illusions about the election of a president, and I can explain that to you, but I have no sense that the way social change really happens is through electoral politics. I think electoral politics are not only corrupt, but they also, if they ever do anything positive, it's tailing after social movements. It's not leading them. And so, you know, in my estimation, Lyndon Johnson, who passed the most far-reaching civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, was never part of the Black Freedom Movement. And FDR was never part of the labor movement. And Abraham Lincoln never belonged to an abolitionist party. And yet those three presidents, their greatness is based on these social movements that more or less forced them to do the right thing at the right time. So my politics are in the street. My politics are not in the electoral arena. But nonetheless, without illusions, there was something, you know, magisterial about that night. And I wanted to be there. I wanted to witness it. And when we got there, we got caught up in the crowd, and the sight was beyond exciting. I was ecstatic. Not because I thought that President Obama would bring the change that I believe in, peace, justice, you know, racial fairness, economic justice. I didn't think that. But what I did think is that 8 years of a really dark, dark cloud was passing. People were excited. This was a blow against white supremacy for this country, with this history, to elect an African American to the highest office in the land. It was something, and I wanted to witness it. I burst into tears that night 4 times. First, just seeing the crowd. It was the crowd. The way I felt that night was, I know this isn't going to last, but these are the people I want to be with. This is the world I want to live in. It was a feeling of joy, not anger, generosity, not revenge. Black and white, Latino, Asian, all of us together, young and old. And so the scenes that were big in my mind were things like an African-American grandmother in a wheelchair waving a big American flag, a young black man with his kid on his shoulders saying, I wanted her to witness this so that 50 years from now she can say she was here. and then, you know, a young Latino police officer dancing with an older white woman. I mean, those things, you know, that's the world I want to live in. I know it's not the world we have, but for that night it was a possible world. That was the fun of it. I burst into tears when I found the exact spot where 40 years earlier I'd been beaten and dragged off to jail during the Democratic Convention of 1968. And then when the first family came out, it was a very moving moment to see Lake Michigan and the brilliant starry sky behind, and to have this young, beautiful family stand up and say, yes, we are here, and we're here for you. I was the last person kicked out of the park that night, I think. I lingered, and I think we left the park about 2 in the morning. Again, I say all that, I paint that picture for you, but without any illusion that he would change the world for us. In fact, I remember saying that night, he can't save us, but with a little luck, we could save him. And that's how I see politics. I think we spend too much time staring at the sites of power we have no access to, like the White House, and too little time looking at the sites of power we have absolute access to, like the street, the workplace, the community. And that was all there that night, all in my heart, in my consciousness.
The one image that I remember was Jesse Jackson, who can talk easily, silent with tears.
Yeah, he was in about the 3rd or 4th row, and tears were streaming down his face. And I've known Jesse Jackson for a long time, and I don't think Jesse had any illusions either. I don't think he thought that without push from below, President Obama would be able to do the things that Jesse believes are necessary. I know that he believes, and I believe, that an independent peace movement is necessary if we're ever going to have peace. That a racial justice movement and an economic justice movement joined are essential if we're going to make any progress in this country. And frankly, if you look back over the last now 6 years, but those first 4 years, nothing could be clearer. The issues that made any progress, any forward motion, were the issues on which people did not shut up and put themselves in a closet. Queer rights. Those folks weren't quiet. I remember Dan Savage, the great queer activist, showing up at the White House at the point when President Obama was saying, I'm trying to evolve, I'm evolving, I'm thinking about the issue. And Savage showed up with a big button that said, evolve already. You know, and it was the lack of quiescence, the lack of politeness. The other folks who made progress were the immigration rights people, the kids from Chicago, the IJL kids, the Immigrant Youth Justice League kids. And they didn't shut up, and they didn't go away. And they wore T-shirts, you remember these T-shirts that said, undocumented and unafraid. And that all was hatched at my university with these kids coming out of Pilsen, coming out of Little Village, coming to the big public university and finding each other, and being able, by finding each other, to name the obstacle to their humanity and stand up. And they went to the White House, and they went in the streets, and they went to the Democratic Convention in North Carolina, and they didn't shut up. And they're the folks who are making progress. The people who are taking it easy. I mean, one of the saddest things in this last summer was the eviscerating of the Voting Rights Act. And you know, once again, I don't blame the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is supreme. They are who they are. A bunch of white supremacist bastards, you know. The people who I blame are us. Why were we not building for the last, why were we quiet for 40 years? Why were we not pushing for an expansive view of being, you know, enfranchised? I mean, why weren't we fighting against felony disenfranchisement? Why weren't we fighting for the ballot to be taken into the prison? These are the things you have to push if you don't want to be set back, and we were set back. So the people who made progress were the people who stood up, the people who fought back, not the people who waited for something good to be delivered. Healthcare is another great example, where, you know, the healthcare law that we've got to shut down government, as you know, on so-called Obamacare, which is, the whole thing is so, the whole campaign is so fraudulent. But the craziest part of it, from my point of view, as a radical, as a left radical, is that the Affordable Health Care Act is nothing to write home about. I mean, it's a lot better than nothing, but the idea that that somehow is a very, socialistic kind of cat's paw is nonsense. It's a Republican plan. The people who love it the best are the health insurance industry, because they're the ones who are profiting from it. Why didn't we fight harder for single payer, for a Canadian system, for a French system, a British system? That's what any civilized country would want. That's what we need, not to put more money into the pockets of the overly privileged, rich health insurance industry. So all I'm saying about that, Jim, is that yes, there was Jesse, there we all were, and a million other people coming downtown, not because there was anything to gain or anything to that we were demanding, simply to hold on to each other and look at each other and say, this is a possible world.
Well, there did seem to be kind of a release of energy,
Huge release of energy, but the distinction I'm making is that most big crowds that I've been in, and I've been in a lot of big crowds, are angry, or they're demanding something, or they're, or they're like the what's it called, the Taste of Chicago. We're feasting and that kind of thing. This wasn't loud. Or there's a drinking party or a football game, or an angry demonstration. This had none of those qualities. It was pure relief. We were kind of floating quietly over the moon, and everyone we saw wanted to take a picture, wanted to hug, wanted to dance a few steps, and it just was delightful. And yet there was no space at downtown. Everybody was pouring in. Every road was clogged, every train was clogged. There was no plan, we just came.
And people just didn't seem to think they could believe it, that this had happened.
It was a bit unbelievable. And that's, I think, a lot because of the history of the country. And, we have an amnesia problem in this country, but if you think back 5 years before that election, the idea of an African-American president was preposterous. It was not something that anyone thought was possible. Just like before this last summer, when Edie Windsor won that lawsuit, nobody thought that gay marriage was a possibility a decade ago. And now it seems not only a possibility, it's inevitable. It's the end of that piece of nonsense, and good for us, progress happens, and sometimes it's from the strangest places. But the one thing I'm certain of is that power concedes nothing without a demand, that it's people, on the ground who make a difference, not the politicians who more or less follow the pressure from the ground.
One of the things that intrigued me about this book is that you got to know Barack Obama, and you made some comments just now about that. What would you like to say about the man that you've worked with and know?
Well, I knew Barack Obama. I don't remember when we met. I'm sure I wrote about it, but we were on a couple of boards together in Chicago, and we were neighbors in Chicago in a small, pretty tightly knit neighborhood. And it would be like you, Jim, somebody saying, "Well, you knew this guy in Ann Arbor." Yeah, you know guys in Ann Arbor, and that's the way it is in Hyde Park. We knew each other. We were friendly, and we sat on a couple of boards together and spoke at a few conferences together. So I knew him. I wouldn't say we were best friends. I don't ever remember sharing a milkshake with 2 straws. And on the other hand, I knew him. And when he was asked about our relationship, and he said, I was a guy around the neighborhood, that struck me as just about right. I thought he was a guy around the neighborhood. And it was before he was mega famous and, had high wattage. He was a guy we would run into at the bookstore or the supermarket. So we knew one another in that way. I often said about Barack Obama, really from the beginning of meeting him, that he was the smartest guy in any room he walked into. Very, very smart, very learned, very curious, very interesting. He was a compassionate and decent guy, a great papa, a good man. That doesn't mean he had left politics. Didn't mean we agreed on politics. And the whole attempt during the campaign, first by Clinton, then by McCain-Palin, then by the right-wing media, to somehow make him something he wasn't, was despicable. So when he said during the campaign, I'm a moderate, middle-of-the-road, pragmatic politician. He got it exactly right. The right wing looked at him and said, no, he's a secret socialist, pals around with terrorists, a hidden Muslim, and that was their crazy lunatic line. But the left was somewhat similar. They looked at him and said, I think he's winking at me. But he wasn't winking. He said the truth. Moderate, middle-of-the-road, pragmatic politician. He also said, again and again, if you want peace, build a peace movement. I think, the most interesting thing he said during the campaign, that first campaign, was when he was asked who Martin Luther King would support. And he said King wouldn't support any of us. He'd be in the streets building a movement for justice. Now, only somebody who'd been a community organizer could have said such a thing or understood the truth of such a statement. But he's absolutely right. King wouldn't have gone begging for this candidate or that candidate. He'd have done what he does, build a movement for justice, and then see where the chips fall. But don't sell yourself out to some politician in some vain hope that he'll reflect your deepest values. That's never going to happen. So I think Obama was, as I say, a good guy, a smart guy. I have a lot of friends. My dad was living with me during those years. He was, Republican, head of Commonwealth Edison. I didn't take a political litmus test on him either. In fact, I don't know anybody who does, who says all my friends passed some political litmus test, and I don't think Obama did either. And one of the things that I felt very strongly about that whole kind of demonizing of Jeremiah Wright and Rashid Khalidi and me, but much more important, demonizing of Obama because he knew anybody like us. And my response to that is that it's the old guilt by association nonsense, and it's very treacherous and very dangerous politically. But more than that, in a wildly diverse democracy like this, speaking to the widest number of people and then having a mind of your own should be seen not as a sin, but as a virtue. And the fact that this politician knew a lot of weird people all across the board in Chicago, that's a good thing. Doesn't mean he believes what we believe or, takes advice from me. I wish he did, but he doesn't.
You said in that night in Grant Park, let us have this night, because you had seen the world you want to live in.
Right. And what I mean by that is a world of love and generosity, not fear and anger. A world of people embracing one another across all kinds of categorical divides that characterize our country, black and white, young and old, poor and wealthy. We were all there, and it didn't matter because we were there without masks, without pretension. We were there to be with one another and to, as you said, take a sigh of relief and float gently over the moon, because something was coming to an end that had been hateful and difficult. And who knew what was there in the future? A lot of it depended on us, and it still does. The future, everyone says it, and it's obviously true, the future will be different. Change is coming. Will it be a better world? That depends on us. It depends on what we do or don't do. It could be a much worse world. So that's what I think we ought to worry about.
One of the things I found fascinating when I talked with other people and told them I was going to be interviewing you is I think the cornerstone of what you do has been your professorship of education. And so I thought that might be interesting to talk about because that doesn't seem to have gotten as much value as I think is there.
Well, of course not. And the reason is because, my, entry into the political conversation in 2008 and still had to do with demonizing Obama. And the demonizing of Obama depended on holding up one moment in my life and making it represent everything. And the truth is that that moment, the period of the Vietnam War, especially the last 5 years of the Vietnam War, and my militant opposition and my being one of the founders and leaders of the Weather Underground, that had way too much symbolic heft for the opposition to Obama to leave alone, and so that's what they used to punch him around with. But no, I mean, the work that I do, and I see no contradiction. I know people do, but think people create these cartoons about others, but in my own life, I don't see any opposition between being a civil rights activist, an anti-war activist, a socialist, and a teacher. Those things don't seem in contradiction to me. But a lot of my work and most of my writing is about education. And I think in many ways, this is the most relevant, this moment that we're living in now, the relevance of a focus on public education and fighting for public education has never been stronger. It's what I do, and it's what I do day in and day out, is to fight against the kind of juggernaut that's trying to privatize the public space, that's trying to demonize teachers and destroy the collective voice of teachers. And I'm in Chicago and nationally part of the forces that are trying to fight back and say, no, we need public education, that in a democracy, without a free, common public school, we are doomed. And that free, common public school is under huge assault from the powerful, including from the Obama administration. And that's what I spend most of my time assisting.
Well, the issue, one of my professors in my grad school classes told me that the rationale for the No Child Left Behind law was plagiarized from a report on the Council of Higher Education saying, don't do this. And the title was ripped off from a woman who had a foundation to help kids.
That's right.
And I thought that really succinctly encapsulates what the whole thing, just like you said, it's to take away public education and privilege private, parochial, and charter schools.
Exactly. No Child Left Behind is stolen from Marion Wright Edelman, the black civil rights lawyer who ran the Children's Defense Fund for many years. Yeah, and now we have Race to the Top, which is just No Child Left Behind in drag, just as Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, another South Side Chicago guy around the neighborhood, he's really just Margaret Spellings in drag. He's just like Bush's Secretary of Education. And the crazy thing is about the Republicans, the Democrats, the foundation officers, and the corporate reformers, is they have a simple strategy, and it has three parts. One is privatize the public space, give the public schools to private managers. Two is destroy the collective voice of teachers, meaning their unions. And the bizarre thing is that, and kind of demonize teachers in the process. And three is reduce education to a test score. And really that's only for other people's children, because Arnie Duncan's children, Barack Obama's children, Mayor Rahm Emanuel's children, they go to schools where they have arts and music and clubs and sports, and English literature is honored and valued. But they ask for other kids that they go to schools where drill and skill and test taking is the whole purpose, and that is a catastrophe for democracy. And the reason that's true is because in a democracy we hold as a precious and fragile ideal the idea that every human being is of incalculable value, which means that the fullest development of each is the condition for the full development of all. And that is under attack, and that's why we have to fight back.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize that standardized testing is racist by its nature, because it's based on culturally appropriate answers.
Absolutely.
And the only way you know those answers if you've been privileged to be trained in how to ferret that back.
Absolutely. If you want to know how you'll do on your first standardized test, look at the class background and income of your parents. All this fancy, apparatus that pours billions of dollars into the Pearson company really is just a gloss over. You just ask people, what do your parents make, and stand over there. It amounts to the same thing. And so the kind of relentless reduction of education to that. So my answer to the Race to the Top people, and I had this long talk with Arnie Duncan about this not so long ago, because we're at a conference together. But in a democracy, what we ought to say is that whatever the wisest and most privileged parents have for their kids, that's what we should want for all kids, for our community's kids. And so look at where the Obamas send their kids today, or where they sent their kids in Chicago. Class size of 12, capped, a curriculum based in part on pursuing your own interests, a teaching corps that's not only respected but unionized. if it's good enough for those kids, why is it not good enough for the kids on the west side of Chicago? And anything less is not only unlovely, but destructive to our future. And that's why this is a fight we have to have.
One of the funnier episodes I went through in this class on the No Child Left Behind, this grad class, is that we were supposed to have a project and interview a school official. And so I selected the principal of Pioneer High here in Ann Arbor.
Nice.
I went through 4 different attempts with 4 different people, and not once did I get the interview. Because as soon as they knew that I knew how to interpret the numbers, and that I already knew from the research director of the school district that black students took 20 points less than the white students, they found all kinds of excuses of handing off, no, we can't do it. And it would go up to just before the actual interview, and I'd get a call and say, I can't do it.
I love it. Yeah, I love that. And I'll tell you, it brings to mind one of the things I do based on this idea that whatever the most privileged people have should be a standard that we aspire to for all kids. Whenever there's a crazy thing that happens in Chicago, I'll give you 2 quick examples. I always go to the lab school where the Obamas sent their kids, where Arnie Duncan attended for 12 years, where I sent my kids, and where both Mayors Daley and Emanuel sent their kids. I always go to the lab school and ask them how they respond to that, because, so here's one silly example. The Chicago Public Schools last spring banned a book by Marjane Satrapi, the Iranian book called Persepolis. It's a graphic novel, wonderful book. But they banned it in the Chicago Public Schools because a parent complained that in one of the little cartoon panels a boy's penis was showing. They're like banning Maurice Sendak for Where the Wild Things Are, right? So I went to the lab school, I called the lab school, I got the librarian, and I said, do you have Persepolis in your library? She said, yeah, we have 9 copies, 2 in French. We have 2 copies of the movie that was made of the book. I said, do the kids read it? She said, the 7th graders read it. It's a required reading in the 7th grade. So Rahm Emanuel's kids have real art and real literature. The kids at Lane Tech get more drill and skill, no art, no literature.
Well, thank you. We've completed the interview, and I thank you for being on Riprap.
My pleasure, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.